everyone. My name's Sophia Hall, and I'm today's moderator for the Meet a Poet series. I'm a poet myself from Washington, D.C., where I served as the Youth Poet Laureate in 2023. I'm a student at the University of Pennsylvania, where I study English and creative writing. And in fact, the poet I'm about to introduce is one of my most treasured teachers, mentors, and inspirations, Laynie Browne. Laynie Browne was born and raised in Los Angeles. She's the author of over 13 collections of poems and 3 novels. Her honors include a 2014 Pew Fellowship, a National Poetry Series Award for The Scented Fox, selected by Alice Notley, a Contemporary Poetry Series Award for drawing of a Swan Before Memory, and residencies at the MacDowell Colony. Her poetry has been translated into numerous languages: French, Spanish, Chinese, Catalan, and now Russian. She teaches at the University of Pennsylvania and Swarthmore College. Thank you, Laynie, for your time and presence today. I remember you announcing this new poetry collection during our modern and contemporary poetry class last year at UPenn, ModPo for short, and I'm so excited to hear them aloud. After the reading, we're going to have a brief Q&A session with the audience, so for everyone watching, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Now I'm going to turn it over to the illustrious Laynie.
Thank you so much, Sophia, and hi to everybody. So happy to be here today and to meet you all. And I'm going to be reading from this new book. It's called Apprentice to a Breathing Hand. And this is one book in a series of books that I'm calling my homage text, that are books that I have written for a particular poet who has made my life as a poet possible, whose work and presence in the world has been a supreme inspiration to me. And this particular book is written for the poet Meme Bersenberg. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump in and start reading from the beginning. Elusive. First advice: if you can't find your desk, or you don't have a desk, you still have to clear debris. First the horse's head, then the bird outside the frame, then the window, then the one forsaken leaf, orange and desiccated, caught in abandoned web. Push the calendar away from the floating heart given to you by radiance of undoing. If your light falls adamantly forward, scarring your efforts, see this as kissing paper. Look carefully at the fortunes pasted around you. If you find carnelian, take off your hands. Place train ticket atop subway card, atop golden folder, atop receipt, atop rags, atop regret, atop a shell with a hole for threading. Place your head inside notebooks you cannot bear to have borne. Run away with yourself. If you've ever written breath, you know exactly the color of ice with live violets in centers. Whispers. A message or an image may pierce the 1,000 small ailments. Sitting out of doors, note rising heat and maelstroms. A mind was on the ground under the table for everyone to see. We put on our best imitation of a person, but it was not good enough. We averted our eyes. We lay there writhing. Poor thing, we should have said before going on with our dinner, but instead we said nothing. We excused ourselves, climbed the stairs, and locked the doors, and here we are, sorting membranes from letters, hypotheses from paintings. Leave us to our alchemy. Forms will emerge. If you can't find your rest, or if you don't have any rest, you will still need a place to be, horizontal, preferably beneath the lunar awning. I tried to explain this, but my breath was silver and my hands I could never find. You retrieve scraps of lace and place them to my lips as if to reverse utterance. Leave me to sand, candles, bedding, my body in my own possession, kept changing. What I sought was more elusive than shadow. Vapor. Carry your egg, your vapor, up the stairs, satirically. Embroider hammocks from ether. Fall to sleep suddenly, but wake slowly. Rotate each ankle before you step into moorings. Prepare your nest and allow yourself to steep. 3 scoops of hibiscus, 2 of licorice. Don't measure the buds of lavender. Ignore grains of sand or pollen in the back of your throat. Carry a flask carved from wood, a red liquid. Stain your dress with ice. Small white flowers on a blue background in the bodice turn gold and crimson. Take off your outer designs. Rub the fabric between your fingers as you sink. Remove the memory of silhouettes from your posture. Pull a thin sheath over your shoulders to remember the way another described you to a mirror. Carry the night you gave your name to darkness across your forearms. Then sit in front of that divining screen that separates you from your cursive body. Lift the glass and stain the frock of your consciousness. Each night, walk through coarse air. Breathe heavily as if your neck wore burlap clouds, as if twinkling in the trees as you approach did not represent flight. Visit frogs-sounding cows, trees spilling water, and the dirt path colored by the silent child. Open your throat until your mouth swells with darkness. Coax. Conjure milky lunar winds. Leave your outline behind. Images faint. Pose as dolls, paper warm. Overrun sacrosanct maps. An absent place steals powers. Singes violet. Insists in stark vellum. Printing sans color reduces drawings to scales of gray. I never planned to be a feather, a peony with fallen head, gown drawn on, translucent. My texture was quiet and unprintable, delicate pencil tracings. Ink is less costly than cloth, petals more volatile than names. Talk through proofs before galleys. Images we see simultaneously are most useful. A door is pinned open. Ghost translates marginalia into cafes, drinks from verses and annotations. Roan light falls onto circular tables, illuminates a desk, stands in a doorway. 3 shadows sit on a fence. Do you hear their rippling? Stay lost, waiting for words to come alive as they enter your mouth, like carbon looking into a mirror. Red liquid, pink glass engraved with incantations. Coax dusk, letters, thread, stand under awnings hewn to invite. An alphabet is a sturdy audience, a candelabra of lunar hands. Molten. She marks on her silken calendar when to molt, a woman before going to bed, yet every night a river. Warm skin in skein wanders, causal arrival. How to wilt in profusion, hydrangea, glide to soil as molten slip. Eyelights cover her entire ideation. Recline into silence, into the unconscious, but we don't use that word. We use the name of an animal. Night covers her like sand and silt, like water. Every night is a session of spikes, repetition, closing of obsidian. An underground bird talked into a drawer, a sleeping elevator stuffed inside a sock, a trance, a garment, a tent. Who placed her inside this vessel? Was it a hand, small and luminous, impossible to name? And if she was entirely lost in the day, at least when she lay down in this river of cotton, this river of creased and perplexed flash, at least when she closed Saturn, at least she did not need to travel the question who she was, a series of fits, permutations, pierced by a seamstress, one could only call nascent selves, a substance otherwise opaque as night. The last three poems I'm going to read are later in the collection, and they are all ecological poems which feature an owl. And this one is called Barred, B-A-R-R-E-D, which is the name of one kind of owl, a barred owl. Barred. Noiselessly through the canopy, mottled white and brown, underparts marked with vertical bars on pale background, upper breast crossed with horizontal lines. I placed the book beside me, in front of my eyes, like a headlamp, to votive my way, hoping to seance your name, and simultaneously to never surface, hoping to wing and tail, hoping to roost quietly by day, to live in mature forest of deciduous and evergreen, often near water, to nest in tree cavity, overwhelmed by the lexicon, to feed on words. Waters are still gold inside a story I make up and send as if it were morning inside glades of felt, absolutely alone, truth unbarred. Courtship as a title is too brief, too informal in terms of the ways I want to pearl one text to another, yet we become lost in the endless import, nimbus of radiance. Don't let imagined dialogue overwhelm you. It's impossible not to be lost inside the nest, which is already lostness, coil of feather and rag. I refuse to pluck and prune a finished replica. I give you what you might extract and set out in sun, much more than you expect, one tiny shard of shell. A red thread, translucent scripts of Madrona unfurling, a place you've never been. Barred owls call to each other vociferously through cedar and hemlock. Brace your neck and look up. Will I ever find you? And the spell I place on a limb that you be potently insect, nuance, and resin. Grasping bark with bill and talon, flapping, walking your way up trunk to take up residence in unfragmented rising. Owls are easiest found in forests at night, asking who will provide alchemy of fire, saucepan, and water. What am I doing here? Can anyone tell me? Ululation. They loved the owl more than ridiculousness. They went for a walk looking for owls and emerged owl-headed, unrustling. They called to owls but saw only hovering foxes. They were so disappointed it didn't matter that no one had ever before seen sky foxes. They tried to be light, failed. Everything was distant except for the land. They begged expansiveness, breath, spirits, seals and passages beyond return. At the threshold, they walked beyond non-place to unsound. And finally, nesting. And this one is written from the perspective of the owl. I woke helpless, covered in white down, with eyes closed. I'm told the egg was pale, with rough surface of swamps, stream sides, uplands. The moon was orange with smoke, dust, and pollen. To present-day viewers, residential nests are like picture postcards. They remind us of a unique living style of a bygone age. Typical features to be found in a nest include a half-height screen door, sliding floor with horizontal stars, carved woolen screens, etched feather windows with twig spirals. With the passage of time, signs of wear have appeared on matting, mud, and ornamental leaves. Once functional, trees have now become witnesses of beheading and uprooting called development. My nest was in a natural cavity in an old forest with dead trees in the distance between self and face. A world head fledgling. Recent decades have seen the demolition of many nests and rarely the refurbishment of their interiors. Architectural components of old-styled nests from those demolished residences face total oblivion. I have succeeded in preserving some and include them in this exhibition. First, I prepared the story surface, then learned to strike intruders with feet. I preserved some nests by burying them in pockets, others by lacing third eyes. I learned to wear nests on my head, to translate duets, cackles, and haws. I learned to store narration in the crook of a branch or the top of a snag, to swallow whole, head first, and then body.
Wow, Laynie, thank you so much. Those were beautiful.
Thank you.
Your reading voice and performance is just stellar, and I feel like I'm brought into this world of magic where words are alchemy. So thank you. One of my favorite, I guess, two lines were, "If you've ever written breath, you know exactly the color of ice with live violets in the centers." And this feels like what your collection does. It's writing breath down and capturing literally ululation of owls and the vociferous calls. It's like an owl communicating through a dark forest requires breath, and us speaking right now requires breath. And breath is just a part of so many practices of yoga, of meditation. So, really capturing that in your words. And the other line that really stuck out to me from this reading was "walked beyond non-place to unsound." It reminded me of Amiri Baraka's "How You Sound" that we talk about in our modern poetry class, ModPo, because this is all about sound and trying to evoke meaning and word associations by just choosing the exact right word that contains all the different pockets of sound that we're trying to capture. So, yeah, those were my brief thoughts and standout lines from the reading so far, and I want to just dive right in. What inspired the title "Apprentice to a Breathing Hand," and how do you see apprenticeship playing out in your poems? Is it through your relationship with May Brossenberg? Is it some other way as an apprentice to language itself?
So well said, Sophia. Thank you so much for those comments. And to your first question, yes, and yes, and yes. Apprenticeship. Definitely my relationship with other poets, May, language itself, also the land, the plants, the physical environment is important. But the title also is drawn from an epigram from the Argentinian poet Alejandra Pizarnik, which is the epigram that begins the book. So it's in Spanish. Su despertar de mano respirando de flor que se abra al viento. Forgive my poor Spanish accent. The translation in English is waking up like a breathing hand, like a flower opening to the wind. So I guess I'm imagining, being apprenticed to a flower, wind, the elements. So other people, other texts, and also the world that we live in, and all the miraculous things that we can learn from the plants and the animals and the ocean and the stones and everything.
Since you already have the book up with you, can we take a look at the cover?
Yeah.
So I remember in class you mentioned how you used your own handwriting for the design, the title, and
Yeah.
it's your own piece of artwork.
Mm-hmm.
Breathing hands, or hands holding on the front.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel like your relationship with other mediums like collage and fine arts connects and like helps your relationship with verse and words?
Yeah, well, all the arts are hugely inspiring to me. And I am a visual artist. I've done collage for a long time. This is a ink drawing. I love dance, theater, I mean, all of it. So to me, it's not really separate. And I'm more and more interested in performance. I've been writing, some of my other recent books are multivocal. So I've been playing around with performance with more than one person. I'm just interested in all the ways the work can connect with people beyond just the printed page. But all of these practices, I think, are helpful and inspiring to me. And I couldn't be a poet without, literature, but also music and visual art and all the arts.
Yeah, they're so intertwined, and even for me, I also write plays in addition to writing poetry, and I find that poetry informs my playwriting because it helps me shorten lines of dialogue, but then my playwriting and or theatrical me leaning more into theater in my poetry lets me have more dialogue and just having more humor and fun. So they definitely are intertwined. I also noticed a more meta aspect of these poems, and we're all about meta in ModPo and meta pedagogy. So to me, a lot of the poems almost read like Ars Poeticas, like instructions for writing poems. And I was wondering, do you ever have a specific writing ritual or routine that you follow, or is it more intuitive when you write a poem?
I never know what I'm doing. I'm always writing into the unknown, but I do have rituals and routines, and it's different at different times of my life. And I guess that's one ritual, is learning how to figure out whatever is one's schedule or, formal restraints in terms of time, how to create pockets. But in recent years, I like to write very first thing in the morning by hand in a notebook, and also to do something visual by hand in a notebook very first thing, before I'm even fully awake, before I look at the news, before I, look at anything else. Just try to write from that liminal space, that different state of consciousness. And you mentioned breath and yoga and meditation, and all of these practices are hugely important to me and help me to be able to do anything, including writing.
I've been talking about ModPo a lot. So do you want to explain your role as a TA in ModPo at UPenn and how you teach poetry typically and creative writing?
Yeah, well, I would love to extend a big and warm welcome to everybody here and everybody who might be watching this later to come to ModPo, which you can just go to modpo.org, modpo.org. And basically, it's a free online massive course that's been going on for more than 10 years. That was started by and run by Al Philris, who's the founder of Kelly Writers House at UPenn. And basically, it's a community where more than 90,000 people are signed up worldwide, and all the content is free and streaming. And it really is a global community where people are kind and in conversation and building friendships through reading poems together and welcoming the more viewpoints, the better. Nothing is scripted, nothing is a lecture. It's just kind of showing up with a poem and talking about it. So everybody could sign up and check it out for yourselves. And right now we're in the middle of a 10-week, what we call symposium mode, where we have a lot of opportunities for real-time interaction if people want that, which runs September through mid-November every year. But also the material is just always available at any time for people. So the pedagogy, or the way that it's taught, is just conversation, asking questions, having fun. All are invited. No prerequisites. There's no right or wrong answers. Just a real-time, ongoing conversation. Does that sound right, Sophia? You want to add to?
It does. And the gift is that you get to make connections with everyone else who's reading the poem, and you get to feel connected not only with the poet, even though some of them have passed away long, long ago, and some of them are still alive today. I think it's just all about the real person connection, because a lot of poetry can be just sitting in your room by yourself, hunched over a collection and thinking, this doesn't make any sense. Can I talk to someone about this? That's what ModPo is there for. Yeah. I wanted to explain what ModPo is a little bit more fully, because the next question I have is based off of a poem we discussed in ModPo, Invasion of the Body Snatchers by Bernadette Mayer.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that when we were talking about her and her collection of daily sonnets, it was very feminist and incorporating daily routine in poetry, and not trying to say, in order to be an artist, you have to let go of the things that may also make you a woman. And in fact, you have to combine both sometimes, and they're essential to each other in order to understand her work. And a lot of your poems, at least the first few that you read, engage with everyday, such as carrying eggs of vapor up the stairs satirically, and that little satirically kind of nudges you in the direction that this is an act of irony, that this is not taking itself seriously. And embroidering hammocks from ether, this kind of like everyday act of embroidery that happens in the domestic sphere, but then you're just transcending it. It's made of ether. This is some sort of chemical reaction bubbling in a pot. So how do you think your poetry ties in with feminism, with elevating the mundane into something that's transcendent? And is there a responsibility for feminist poetry to capture both of these aspects?
Wow. Okay. So many things to address in your question. Well, first, I just want to know, you mentioned Bernadette Mayer, and her book of sonnets is just called Sonnets.
Okay.
I wrote
Yours is Daily
mine is
Sonnets.
Daily Sonnets, but
Okay.
actually I wrote another book of sonnets called Antediluvian Sonnets for Bernadette Mayer that's coming out next year, that I started as soon as she passed, which was November in 2022, just to be in conversation with her through that initial mourning period that I had. So, I mean, dailiness, yes, I think it's in her work, it's in my work. In this particular book, I'm really interested in exploring different states of consciousness, and that is one way to think about the daily as well, you know? So there's imagination space, and there's contemplative space, and what we might just call basic mindfulness, which allows the metacognitive moment when I can step back from, making a hibiscus tea or carrying something up the stairs, and I'm imagining this. I didn't even know what I was imagining, but there's imagination space inside some of the images. And there's also this ars poetica sometimes, which happens by accident, that you mentioned. The one that I remember the most is about the alphabet is a sturdy, I can't quote myself. The alphabet is a sturdy audience, something like a candelabra of lunar hands. It's like thinking about how the alphabet itself is primordial. So every time I write by hand in my notebook, if I'm not quite calm and connecting, I try to just slow it down and just focus on, okay, now I'm writing this letter of the alphabet. I need to make it slower and slower to really be present with, so that is one way of thinking about dailiness, and not just dailiness, but, moment to moment, what's happening, which also connects to different states of brainwaves and consciousness, which Bernadette Mayer was also really interested in. And the question about feminist poetics, I never want to be prescriptive to other
Mhm.
poets. So I never say, oh, feminist poets should do this or that. But like, I mean, for myself, I think that there is a lot in this book about being a woman and what that means in terms of the body, in terms of safety, in terms of aging, in terms of being a mother and having your children grow up and go in the world. All of these things are in this book. Like, for instance, in the middle, there's a long poem called Dance that I wrote when my first kid went off to college.
Mhm.
So yeah, being a woman in all these different stages of life and being in the physical world embodied at this time and place is definitely in this book strongly.
Yeah. Um, I can't believe my question led directly to your book of poems that are coming out next year. That's a really great coincidence. And I also think your metaphor about the audience being a candelabra of lunar hands also just emphasizes that there's always reaching, there's an audience reader connection, and it's not like, oh, an audience poet connection, and that the poet isn't just writing into a void, there's always someone there to receive it. We're having a conversation right now that's being received, and the receiving party usually wants to reach out and wants to grab hold, and that's why it's just many hands just taking everything all in.
And
So I
it's
really,
the
yeah.
alphabet. The alphabet is the sturdy audience. An alphabet
Oh,
is a sturdy audience, a candelabra of lunar hands. So that speaks to this this being in conversation with language itself.
yeah.
That kind of idea of ars poetica is this meta, as you were talking about, relationship with language.
It's just beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I was also you're so prolific in writing a book so often and just always in this practice. I'm wondering, do you find that writing books just motivates you and propels you forward to keep up your practice? Is that part of what your steadiness is, or is there just always constant inspiration coming towards you? I'm just in awe of how many books you've written, and it seems like poetry just flows out of you. Or not just poetry, but just writing and art.
You know, people ask me a lot about how prolific I am. In fact, there's a podcast which we were just talking about before we went on that we're going to link, and which the interviewer says, like, people ask you this question, you didn't really answer it. And I said, really? I didn't really answer it. And I spent a long time talking about it. So it's been on my mind. But I mean, I think that writing is the way that I know what I think and I show up in the world. It's the way I move through the world. It's who I am. It's what I need to do. You know,
Yeah.
I just need to do it. But that doesn't mean that everybody should write a lot, because I feel people often ask me and they're like, how do you make so many? I'm not trying to make a book. I need to be in the process of working, the process of creating something. And I never know what it's going to be or if it's going to be a book, but just the process of sitting down to write or to draw or collage or whatever I'm doing, photographs, it makes me feel alive.
When you said that it's your way of being, it's your way of knowing what you're thinking in the world, it reminds me of, like, a form of self-care. Like, some people floss their teeth 5 times a day, and some people take an everything shower where you just scrub everywhere and you just write poems, and that's how you cleanse. And yeah, your point about you don't write with the goal of the book, you write to write is so true.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you have to just start and let go of any expectations you have for yourself. Um, I I'm wondering what made you realize that you were a poet and artist. Was there a specific moment? When did you first start
Mm.
creating art? when you were younger?
Yeah, there was a specific moment. I mean, I was always a reader as a kid, as soon as I could read. And when I was 9 years old, I had a babysitter who gave me a book of poems. And it was like, a book you would get in the airport. It was not some amazing, it was just, like Robert Frost and Ogden Nash. But I had never been exposed to poems. I had no artists in my family. Nobody was nobody was as introverted or as interested in creativity as I was. And so I was given this book of poems, and I just immediately read and memorized some of the poems and wrote my first poem. And that was it. I kept writing poems, and I always had the idea that, they were pretty bad.
Yeah.
They were really bad poems. I wrote a lot, but I just thought, like, well, if I just keep doing it, I will improve. And I still think that that's a good motto for me, or any writer who needs encouragement. I mean, we all need encouragement, myself included, because most writing is rewriting, in my experience.
And do you think revising ever helps you with your poems too, with the editing process?
Yeah, I mean, revising, I find it's easy for me to just generate lots of things. But editing and finishing is much more challenging for me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
We have a question from the audience, from Victor, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on it.
Mhm.
His question is about AI poetry and writing poetry using an automatically generate or an artificial intelligence that automatically generates your poetry for you. What are your thoughts on that? How should we approach using AI in poetry, if at all?
Well, again, I don't really believe in the should, like prescribing what anybody else should do. My feeling is that AI is a tool like any other tool. And so it just depends on how one uses a tool. If you're interested in experimenting, experiment. I think it's not a replacement for human consciousness, but it is a place to potentially play and explore. And a lot of poets I've been inspired by do use chants and all kinds of formulas to create verse and found poems and so on. I think, and most of my students, they're not really interested in having AI be a replacement for creative writing, because they have something to say and they want to say it. So maybe AI could help them play with what they want to say. So I guess I'm just saying it can't replace human writing, but it can be a useful tool.
Yeah, I think there's so many tools we also use in ModPo, generating like random number generator to talk about lines.
Yeah.
It's just about how a digital artist sometimes uses like an iPad, and that probably was a revolutionary form of technology, but
Hmm.
I don't know. I also really appreciate your kind of check on me about anti-prescribing things, because it's all about providing the instead of following like poetry isn't a recipe.
Hmm.
You can't just add a tablespoon of vanilla extract to 3 cups of flour and everything is exact and precise. It's more intuitive. I want to ask you more about alchemy and how you came to that as kind of the theme for your work. Because I've been reading some medieval literature, especially Chaucer, that
Hmm.
talks about the alchemist's tale and how he made, quote unquote, made silver from these kind of more lesser metals. And even your epigram is from a collection called Diana's Tree, which is about silver turning into a tree, like having these kind of dendritic branch-like structures. So how did you come across alchemy as the theme for your work? Have you always written about it? What drew you to that for this particular collection?
Well, I fell in love with that book, Diana's Tree. And I've also always been interested in alchemy, and the Middle Ages also, which you mentioned. What else do I want to say about alchemy? Even if the alchemist can't turn, one substance into gold, it's an interesting metaphor, like what happens with Diana's tree and it becoming this dendritic form. It's like it isn't actually a tree, but it looks like a tree. And so it's a very compelling image to me, like what are we after when we want to play with this primordial substance of language? Most of the time, we are confronting our own consciousness if we are attempting to evolve as humans, which, it's like a lifelong process of trying to evolve. And poetry and the arts is one vehicle that can help one to go on this journey of asking, who am I and why am I here? And what do I need to understand while I'm embodied that I have not understood? And how can language help me to continue to evolve? So in other words, it's like thinking about the self as the material that wants to be changed through a form of alchemy. And the alchemy is poetry. The alchemy is this process of self-inquiry through reading and thinking and, writing and being in conversation with other writers.
Yeah. And in alchemy, there's this concept of like the philosopher's stone, like the automatically generating gold, which would be invaluable, and everything is like in pursuit of this one thing. And even though maybe people weren't successful when they were setting out to do this one goal, this kind of all encompassing impossible task, they did achieve things along the way. It's like the cheesy saying, if you shoot for the stars, maybe you'll land on the moon.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of been in love with what's impossible. I think it's useful to not to get frustrated that one cannot attain an impossible goal, but to have these aspirations that will never be done with, like the journey ends when this life ends, with trying to figure stuff out. Like I'm never going to have myself or the world figured out, but I'm hopefully going to keep investigating and being awake.
Yeah. Seeing the impossibility of something not as a limit, but as a challenge, a dare. You're curious. You want to explore what's out there, and poetry is the way through asking questions and finding more.
One way, and especially poetry that is open as opposed to closed. And here I'm referring to Lynn Hygenian's notion of an open text in her essay, The Rejection of Closure. So what's the benefit of having a poem like one by Emily Dickinson, where there's not only one way to read it, So it's impossible to kind of gloss an Emily Dickinson poem and definitively say what's going on. But that's not a negative, it's a positive.
I know we're almost running out of time of the session, so I want to make sure I get all of my thoughts that are swirling around out there. For your more ecological poems about the owl, it's so vivid, and I I love owls. I feel a certain affinity to them, and by reading the poem, it just feels like I am in communion with an owl when I'm really in communion with Laynie, who's in communion with an owl, and I think that it's so special, the layers. So how did these, like, 3 poems kind of all together come about? What is the process, and what makes it more of an eco poem, an ecological poem?
Well, I have owls around me where I live. I hear the great horned owl. This particular book was written when I was living on a marine station in San Juan Island. And there was this trail into the woods where literally, like, I would walk down the trail with my kids at dusk, looking for the owl and listening for the owl and hanging out with scientists, with all these ornithological apps and calling out. And, sometimes we would see the owl or hear the owl. So one time I had an owl there just kind of swoop like right over my head at dusk over near the waters. Yeah, and I've always been in many places where I've lived, there've been owls where I would see an owl would just, when I lived in Arizona, it would just sit and just stare at me. I would sit and stare back. I think they're kind of known for that. Also connected to elegy. So an earlier book I published
Mhm.
called You Envelop Me, also with this same press, Omnidawn, which I want to shout out. Thank you so much to Omnidawn and Rusty Morrison in the Bay Area in California. This book, You Envelop Me, was an elegy for my stepmother. And there's a poem called Owl Pages. And that's where, I was living in Arizona. And if I went out in the dawn, there was just an owl sitting there looking at me. It felt like a visitation. So I've been kind of obsessed with the world around me and the natural world, and that makes me more aware about climate change and about destruction of habitat. So one of those poems is all about the destruction of habitat for owls, nesting. Like, it's kind of funny, as if in the nest there were an actual house. There's all this imaginative description of the house, but there's also discussion of trees being uprooted and the tops of them being cut off and the
Yeah.
physical environment being destroyed. So that's kind of what I was thinking about in speaking to the ecological, which I think is throughout this. The center long poem, Euphoric Rose, is linked to Meme Bersenberg's book, Hello the Roses, her title poem, which
Mhm.
is a conversation between a woman and a rose, and a rose and a woman. And I talk a lot about that at length in this podcast.
Yeah. I think if you look up, just speaking of the podcast, if anyone's watching and wants to go check it out, it'll probably be put in the YouTube live stream chat, or you can also just look up Laynie Browne podcast, um, Apprentice to a Breathing Hand, and I'm sure it'll pop up. I was wondering, well, first of all, about the owl and the nest and imagining the nest more as a home. That's another tool that poetry applies in order to connect us with the natural world, personification. So just by personifying the owl and the nest, it already makes it more human, and someone who is not aware of the owl's play has a connection automatically that might not have been made if you just see an owl out in the wilderness, even though that might be really rare. But it's just like an owl seems so different from you and I, but really we're more alike than different. Before we go, I wanted to ask if you could leave readers of your work or the audience with one sensation, what would you want them to take away from your collection? I know there's no prescription for things, but if there's just a feeling of breath. what would it be?
I like that word breath. Just time to inhale and exhale and connect with wherever you are physically. And that's always miraculous, if we pause, just being where we are, being alive, finding inspiration there and connection there.
I think we actually have one more question from the audience that
Oh,
I'll
okay.
just ask quickly.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
might poetry guide us through the challenges and complexities of modern life?
That's a good one. And a lot of people in the ModPo community are talking about that. So I would, you might find a lot of interesting answers there. I would say it allows us to have a collective focus on something that will change our brain waves together and have us connect. One way to connect with a person or persons is to look directly into their eyes and talk to them. And another way is to collectively gaze at something. And a poem can be a focal point that can give us kind of a pause from other ways of thinking that may require us to, move fast or fix a problem or, push ourselves mentally or engage with a 24/7 news cycle, all kinds of things. And I find it really a relief to just come back to poetry together and whatever people are experiencing and whatever their different thoughts or beliefs, like we can all get together around a poem and rediscover our humanity.
Coming around a poem together or several poems like we just did today, I think it's really important. It's the ending of our session, but really to connect it back to Dante and the Middle Ages, we're just at the midpoint of life's journey. So thank you, Laynie, for joining us. Just one final question. If people in the audience want to keep in conversation with you, stay connected, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would say right now, go to ModPo and you can join in our webcast. And I have office hours on Zoom every week. I'm not on social media. I don't have a website, but I do have a lot on Pen Sound recordings of my readings and such. So that's a good way to connect.
Amazing. Thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. A huge thank you, Laynie. This was incredible, so special to share this space with you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.